Okay, picture this, a dinner party. The guests, only two of the most influential leaders of a brand new global movement. The vibe is great, a real symbol of unity. And then, halfway through the meal, one leader just gets up, walks away from the table, and completely shuns the other guests. The man who walked away was the Apostle Peter, and the man who was about to call him out, right there in front of everyone, the Apostle Paul. So let's get into this, because this wasn't just some awkward dinner. This was a showdown that would define the entire future of Christianity.
Wow, Paul does not mince words here. This wasn't some quiet chat behind closed doors. He says he opposed Peter to his face. Why? Because in Paul's mind, what Peter did was a public betrayal of the very gospel they were supposed to be preaching. I mean, the tension here is just immense. These guys aren't rivals. They're the pillars of the same faith, and one just publicly accused the other of being fundamentally, disastrously wrong.
And just look at how quickly it all falls apart. Before a certain group shows up, everything is totally fine. Peter's at this mixed table in the city of Antioch, sharing a meal with both Jewish and non-Jewish or Gentile followers of Jesus, which, by the way, was a huge deal. But then some men from the more traditional all-Jewish church back in Jerusalem arrive, and suddenly Peter gets up and separates himself. Why? He was afraid of what they'd think, and his fear, it was contagious. The other Jewish Christians, even Paul's good friend Barnabas, they all followed Peter, leaving the Gentile Christians just sitting there, completely abandoned.
Paul saw what was happening, and he absolutely knew, this was about so much more than table manners or some social faux pas. Peter's simple act of getting up and walking away was a massive theological statement with huge, huge implications for the future of this new faith.
You have to understand, in that culture, who you ate with defined who you were. It said everything. So by withdrawing, Peter was sending a message loud and clear. You non-Jewish Christians aren't quite good enough on your own. To be a full member of God's family, you have to adopt our customs first. You have to become like us. He had just drawn a theological line in the sand with his lunch plans. So this one dinner dispute, it became the battleground for the very soul of Christianity. Was his new faith just going to be a reform movement inside of Judaism? A closed community for one ethnic group? Or was it something completely different, something brand new, a global, multi-ethnic family where all those old divisions just don't matter anymore? The question was simple but absolutely profound. Who truly gets a seat at God's table? In response, Paul doesn't just scold Peter for being a hypocrite. No, he launches into one of the most jam-packed, powerful explanations of the gospel ever recorded. He's not just trying to win an argument. He's laying out the deep, core logic that makes Peter's actions totally impossible for anyone who really gets the message of Jesus.
Okay, so to follow Paul's thinking here, we need to solve a couple of clues. We have to understand a couple of key terms. The first one is this big, kind of scary theological word, justification. But the key is to grasp what Paul meant by it, not just our modern-day dictionary definition. So for Paul, justification isn't just a legal verdict you get one time. Think of it like this. It's the future, end-of-time declaration from God that you are right with him. And that future verdict is so certain, it gets pulled right into the present moment for believers. And here's the crucial part for this argument. Justification is what defines the boundaries of God's people. It answers that huge question, who's in?
All right, here's our second big clue. Paul keeps saying that people are not justified by works of the law. Now, for centuries, a lot of people thought this just meant, you can't earn your way to heaven by doing good deeds. But that's not quite what Paul's getting at here. It's a little more specific than that. See, when Paul talks about works of the law, he's referring to the specific actions that marked someone as a member of the Jewish community. We're talking about things like following kosher food laws, observing the Sabbath, and circumcision. These weren't really about earning salvation. They were about identity. They were the boundary markers that basically said, we are God's people and you are not. So, when you put these two clues together, Paul's argument suddenly becomes crystal clear. If justification, that is, being part of God's family, comes through faith in Jesus and not through the works of the law, these Jewish identity markers, then everyone is on the exact same footing before God. Your ethnic background, whether you're Jewish or Gentile, is no longer the basis for being included. And this is where Paul pulls it all together. He takes these theological concepts and he paints this powerful picture to show Peter, look, you're not just wrong, you're trying to rebuild a world that has already been demolished. To get his point across, Paul uses this brilliant metaphor. He basically asks Peter to imagine the Jewish law not as a list of rules, but as a fortress, a giant structure with high walls designed to keep certain people in and everybody else out.
This one image makes his whole abstract argument suddenly very, very real.
Okay, watch how this brilliant logic works. Step 1. The fortress of the law separated the Jewish people inside from the Gentiles, who were seen as sinners, on the outside. Step 2. But through his death and resurrection, Christ completely tore down the walls of that fortress, creating a new, inclusive family outside of those old boundaries. Step 3. And Peter, you knew this. You had already left the fortress to eat with the Gentiles. You were already outside with Jesus and the new family. Step 4. But then, out of fear, you panicked and tried to rebuild the very walls that you knew Christ had already destroyed. And this leads to Paul's killer point in step 5. Peter, by trying to rebuild a wall you know is gone, you're not just making a mistake. You become a transgressor, someone who is deliberately defying what God has already done. You're putting yourself in a much worse position.
So what's the way out of this trap? How can Paul and Peter and all of us live in this new, wall-less world without being driven by fear? Paul gives the answer in this absolutely breathtaking statement. The solution isn't to try harder. The solution is to die. When Paul says he's been crucified with Christ, he means that the entire system of identity based on separation, the whole world of insiders and outsiders, of clean and unclean, of us versus them, that entire world died on the cross with Jesus. It's over.
And here's where it gets personal. For Paul, the fear of being made unclean by eating with Gentiles, it's gone, because the self that could be made unclean is dead. He's been freed from that old world's power games because he's now living by the rules of a completely new world.
Now, I know this might all seem like ancient history and some really heavy theology, but believe me, Paul's argument at that dinner party cuts right to the heart of our modern struggles with identity, with belonging, and with division.
Paul is describing two totally different ways to live. On the left, you've got the self that died on the cross. It's this falsely constructed self that builds its identity on being better than other people, on power, on status, and on drawing lines to keep people out. But on the right, that's the new self that lives in Christ. And that, Paul says, is your truest self. A self that is so secure in being loved that it's finally free from that need to prove its worth. It's free to love and to serve and to listen to others instead of constantly judging them. You see, the real liberation that Paul discovered isn't the satisfaction of winning an argument or being on the right side. It's being liberated from the exhausting, anxious need to keep building walls, whether they're theological or social or personal, just to prove to ourselves and everyone else that we are in and they are out. And that leaves us with a pretty challenging question, doesn't it? That dinner party in Antioch forced the early church to decide what kind of community it was really going to be, and it forces us to ask the very same thing. What walls are we building? Based on our politics, our theology, our social class, our culture? What fortresses of exclusion are we, just like Peter, still tempted to rebuild, even when we know they've already been torn down?